My son took out a $150,000 loan in my name and disappeared. 7 years later, he showed up on Christmas as if nothing had ever happened. The deepest pain isn't the one that screams. It's the one that whispers silently while you pretend everything is fine. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I only ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep letting things out. My name is Mary Jane Miller. I'm 72 years old, and this story started one afternoon in July in my small house in Greenwich Village, New York City. I was in my kitchen, my apron stained with tomato sauce, fixing the cornbread for dinner when I heard the familiar steps of Robert, my youngest son, coming up the building stairs. I always recognized his walk, quick, impatient, as if the world owed him something. He knocked on the door in his usual way, 3 sharp, impatient raps. "Mum, open up! I've got great news!" When I opened it, I saw him standing there with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was wearing a freshly ironed white shirt and trousers that I knew were expensive. They were more expensive than a 35-year-old public accountant who was always asking for loans should be able to afford. In his hands, he carried a black leather portfolio, the kind important executives use. "How are you, sweetie?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. "Have you eaten yet? I just made chicken noodle soup and baked chicken." "I don't have time for that, Mum. I'm here for something important," he said. He sat down at the table in my little dining area, the wooden table I had bought at a thrift store when he was a kid. His fingers drummed on the surface while I poured him a glass of iced tea. "Look, Mum," he said, opening the portfolio. "I found an incredible investment opportunity. It's a company that deals with cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin. It's the future of money, Mum. The people who get in now are going to be millionaires in a few years." I looked at him without understanding. Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, words that sounded like something out of a Hollywood movie. "And what does that have to do with me, son?" I asked. Robert smiled, but there was something cold in that smile. "I need you to sign some papers. It's just to make my participation in the business official. You don't understand these things, but trust me, like you always have. It's just your signature, nothing more." I took out my reading glasses and looked at the documents. Tiny letters, huge numbers, technical words that danced before my eyes. I saw my name printed several times. Mary Jane Miller. I saw amounts that seemed fantastical to me. $150,000. I saw the word loan repeated like an echo. "Robert's son, this says it's a loan. I don't want to owe anyone anything." The smile vanished from his face. "Mum, it's just a formality. The bank needs a guarantor, someone to back the investment, but the money goes straight into my business accounts. You won't have to pay anything. On the contrary, when this grows, I'm going to buy you a bigger house in Beverly Hills, with a yard and everything." I hesitated. Something in my stomach twisted, like when I was a kid and sensed a storm coming. "I don't know, son. Your father always said never to sign anything you don't understand completely." Robert's face hardened. He leaned forward, and his voice changed pitch, becoming deeper, colder. "What? You don't trust your own son?" His voice was low. "Mum, you always sacrificed for all of us. You worked double shifts at the clothing factory to pay for our school. You sold your gold earrings so I could study accounting. Now that I can finally give you something back, are you going to play the martyr?" His words hurt me like slaps. It was true. I had worked for 18 years in the factory, from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening, stitching school uniforms until my fingers bled. I had sold my engagement ring when Robert needed money for his college degree. I had eaten tuna and crackers for months, so he and his brothers could have turkey. Besides, he continued, and now his voice sounded wounded. After everything I did for you when Dad died, have you already forgotten who helped you with the funeral expenses? Who came every day to comfort you? That was true too. When Michael, my husband, died of diabetes 5 years ago, Robert had been the only one of my 3 children who hadn't abandoned me. He had paid half of the funeral. He had slept in my living room the first few weeks, so I wouldn't feel alone. He had been my company during those dark months, where every waking moment was a painful miracle. Look, Mum, his voice softened, returning to the one of the boy who comforted my nightmares. Just trust me one more time. This is the last thing I'll ask of you. After this, you're the one who is going to have money to spare. I promise you, on Dad's memory. I picked up the pen. It was a cheap blue pen, the kind they sell at the drugstore. My hand trembled as I wrote my name on every page. Mary Jane Miller. Mary Jane Miller. Mary Jane Miller. My signature. Over and over. Authorizing something I didn't understand out of love for someone I blindly trusted. That's it, Mum. Don't worry about anything. In 6 months, when you see the results, you'll thank me. He kissed my forehead, took the papers, and headed for the door. Wait, Robert. When will I see you again? I'll call you in a few days, Mum. I have to travel to Dallas now to close the deal. But soon, very soon, you'll hear from me. He closed the door, and I stayed there, in my silent dining room, with the smell of baked chicken filling the air, and a strange feeling in my chest, as if I had unknowingly signed my own death warrant. That was the last time I saw my son, for 7 years. The first sign that something was terribly wrong arrived exactly 33 days later, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was watering my geraniums on the small porch when I heard someone knocking on the door insistently. It wasn't the familiar tap of my neighbours or the soft knock of the mail carrier. It was something urgent, official. I opened it and found a young man in a grey suit, blue tie, and a portfolio in his hands. His smile was professional but cold. Mrs. Mary Jane Miller? Yes, that's me. My name is Mr. Johnson, from Wells Fargo Bank. I need to speak with you about your account and some recent activity that requires your immediate attention. My heart started beating faster. I invited the man in and poured him a glass of water while he arranged papers on my dining table. Ma'am, I see here that you authorized a personal loan for $150,000 last month. However, we have not received the first payment, which was due a week ago. Furthermore, your debit account has been overdrawn several times. There must be a mistake, Mr. Johnson. I didn't apply for any loan. My son, Robert, asked me to sign some papers, but he told me it was for a business of his, and that I wouldn't have to pay anything. The man frowned and checked his documents. Ma'am, according to our records, you are the loan holder. Your son is listed as the beneficiary, but the legal responsibility is completely yours. Here is your signature on multiple documents. My world began to shake. I recognized my handwriting, my signature repeated over and over on documents that I now understood with horrible clarity. It was me who owed those $150,000, plus the interest that was already starting to accrue. But my son told me he was going to pay for everything, that it was just a formality, I stammered. I regret to inform you that Mr. Robert Miller withdrew the entire amount 3 weeks ago, and according to our records, he closed all his accounts with us the next day. We have no way to contact him. The words hit me like physical blows, closed his accounts. We have no way to contact him. Every sentence was a dagger sinking deeper into my chest. What does that mean for me? It means, ma'am, that we need to establish a payment plan immediately, or we will have to proceed with legal action. The first payment of $8,500 has been overdue for a week. $8,500. It was more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. It was more than I had held in cash in my entire adult life. After the agent left, with promises that we would look for a solution, I sat in my living room and picked up the phone, with hands that couldn't stop shaking. I dialed Robert's number, which I knew by heart. "The number you have dialed is not available at this time." I dialed again, the same recording. I tried texting. My messages showed up with only a single grey check mark, not delivered. I called his job, the accounting office where he had worked for the last 5 years. "Robert Miller?" "Oh, yes. He resigned a month ago. He said he was moving abroad for a business opportunity. He didn't leave any contact information." The phone slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a dull sound that echoed like a gunshot in my empty house. That afternoon, desperate, I decided to call my other 2 children. I tried first with Patty, my eldest daughter, who lived in Miami with her husband and their 2 children. "Mom, what's wrong? You never call me at this hour." "Patty, I need to talk to you about Robert. Something terrible has happened." I told her everything. Every detail about the papers, the loan, Robert's disappearance. I expected understanding, support, maybe help to figure out what had happened. Her response chilled my blood. "Oh, Mum, not with your drama again. Always exaggerating everything. Always making yourself the victim. Robert is a professional, an accountant. If you signed something with him, it's probably legitimate." "But Patty, he disappeared. He won't answer his phone. He quit his job." "Mom, you're an adult. At 72, you should know that business is complicated. You can't call your children every time you don't understand something. I have my own family to take care of." She hung up. I was left with the phone in my hand, listening to the dial tone that sounded like the echo of my own loneliness. I tried Edward, my middle son, who worked as a mechanic at a car dealership in Atlanta. "What's up, Mum?" "Eddie, your brother Robert." Hold on. What did the spoiled one do now? Did he spend your pension on his little computer courses?" I explained the situation. Edward listened in silence, and when I finished, he let out a bitter laugh. "Wow, Mum. Well, he really screwed you over. But I'm not surprised at all. Robert was always the cleverest of us, and you always spoiled him more than us. Now let him bear the consequences." "Eddie, please, I need help to understand what I can do." "Look, Mum, I have my own problems. The economy is rough. I barely make enough for my family. If you signed those papers, it's your problem. Learn to live with your mistakes, and don't drag us into your stupid decisions." And he hung up too. I sat down on the floor of my living room, on the same tiles where I had watched my children take their first steps, where we had celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where Michael and I had built our family for 30 years. Now those walls were witnesses to my deepest humiliation. That night, I couldn't eat. The baked chicken I had prepared grew cold on the stove while I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how I had reached this point. How the son, for whom I had sacrificed the most, the one who had been with me in my darkest moment, could have betrayed me with such coldness. The bank started calling every day. Certified letters arrived every week. The interest grew like a sickness, multiplying without me being able to do anything to stop it. I sold my television, the one Michael and I had bought to watch the football games together. I sold my sewing machine, which I had used to make uniforms for extra money for years. I sold my gold earrings, the only ones I had left from my marriage, all to pay interest on a debt that grew faster than I could reduce it. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the entrance to my building, I heard Mrs. Remedy, my lifelong neighbour, talking to her friend in a low voice, but loud enough for me to hear. "There goes poor Mary. They say her son swindled her. What a disgrace to raise a thief like that. You kill yourself raising children, only for them to betray you that way. Oh, honey. But she was also to blame. How can she sign something without understanding it? She's too old to be trusting like that." Her words cut through me like knives. Not only had I lost my money and my peace of mind, I had also lost my dignity in front of the people who had known me for decades. That night, for the first time in my life, I considered that maybe it would have been better not to wake up the next day. The following months turned into a downward spiral that seemed bottomless. Each day brought a new humiliation, a new loss, a new confirmation that my life as I knew it had ended forever. The bank had garnished my pension account. The $2,500 I received every month for my years working in the textile factory now went directly to pay the interest on Robert's debt, without me being able to touch a single penny. The teller, a young woman around 25 with long pink-painted nails, explained to me with a forced smile that this would continue until the principal debt was paid off. "Those are the rules, ma'am. The bank has a right of retention on any income of the debtor until the debt is settled." Debtor. That word had become my new identity. I was no longer Mary, the woman who had raised 3 children working double shifts. I was no longer the widow who had buried her husband with dignity. Now I was the debtor, the one who signed without reading, the one who let herself be fooled by her own son. My diet was reduced to the basics: rice, beans, and tortillas when I had money to buy the ingredients. I stopped eating breakfast so the food would last longer. I learned to work miracles with a pound of rice and half a pound of beans so they would last me the whole week. Coffee became a luxury I only allowed myself on Sundays, mixed with so much sugar that it seemed more like sweet water than a beverage. One morning, while figuring out my finances in an old notebook, calculating how many days I could stretch my last $50 bill, there was a knock at my door. It was Mrs. Esperanza, the building superintendent, with an uncomfortable expression on her face. "Mary, excuse me for bothering you, but the administrator asked me to speak with you. You are 3 months behind on your maintenance fee." It was true. The $300 a month I was supposed to pay for building maintenance had become impossible to cover. $300 that used to seem like nothing to me now represented 10 days of food. "How much time can you give me, Esperanza?" "Look, Mary, I feel really bad, but the administrator says if you don't pay in 2 weeks, they'll have to send you a summons. You know how Don Albert is, very strict with payments." Don Albert, the building administrator, was a man in his 60s who had made collecting fees his personal mission. I had seen him evict entire families for smaller delays. For him, personal circumstances didn't exist. Only accounts that balanced or didn't balance. After Mrs. Esperanza left, I sat in my kitchen and tried to find something else to sell. My eyes scanned every corner of the house that had been my home for 20 years. There was almost nothing of value left. The furniture was old and worn, with no resale value. The remaining dishware was just the basics, what I needed to eat. Michael's few books were worthless on the second-hand market. My gaze stopped at the small shelf in the living room, where I kept photos of Michael and a picture of the Virgin Mary, which had been my mother's. There were also Michael's wedding rings, which I had kept after his death like a sacred treasure. They were 14-carat gold. Nothing extraordinary, but they represented 30 years of marriage, 30 years of love, fights, reconciliations, shared plans. I took the rings in my hands. They weighed more than I remembered, or maybe it was my heart that had become lighter. I walked to the bathroom mirror and looked at myself intently. "Forgive me, Michael," I whispered. "Forgive me, but I have no choice." The pawn shop was 6 blocks from my building. I had walked past it thousands of times in my 20 years living in the neighborhood, but I never imagined I would have to go inside one day. The place smelled of disinfectant mixed with desperation. The walls were lined with objects that other people had had to sacrifice: guitars, televisions, tools, jewelry. The man behind the counter was heavy-set and had nicotine-stained teeth. He examined the rings with a magnifying glass, weighing them on a digital scale. "I'll give you $1,200 for both." "Can't it be $1,500? They're pure gold. They were very expensive." The man looked at me with the expression of someone who had heard that plea thousands of times. "Ma'am, gold is cheap right now, and these aren't designer rings. $1,200, take it or leave it." I took the money. $1,200 for 30 years of marriage. $40 for every year of love. The paper I signed said I had 30 days to retrieve the rings by paying $1,500. I knew those 30 days would pass, and the rings would become part of the pawn shop's inventory forever. I walked back home with the money in my shopping bag, feeling like I had sold a piece of my soul. On the way, I ran into Mrs. Remedy, who looked me up and down with a mix of pity and scorn. "How are you, Mary?" "Fine, thank you," I lied. "Oh, that's good, because yesterday I saw you leave with a bag from the pawn shop, and I worried. You never know how things are with the neighbors." Her comment was not innocent. It was her way of confirming that she knew exactly why I had gone to the pawn shop. By tomorrow, the whole building would know that Mary Miller had had to pawn her belongings to survive. That night, while eating my dinner of rice and beans, I received an unexpected call. It was Patty, my eldest daughter. "Mum, how are you?" For a moment, my heart filled with hope. Maybe she had reconsidered. Maybe she was coming to offer me help, or at least understanding. "Patty, it's good to hear from you. I'm going through a hard time." "Yes, Mum. That's why I'm calling. I heard you're going around telling people that Robert stole money from you." My hope collapsed like a building without foundations. "Patty, it's the truth. Your brother made me sign documents for a loan and then disappeared." "Mum, you can't go around slandering your own son. Robert is a respected professional. If you signed something you didn't understand, that was your irresponsibility. It's not his fault." "But honey..." "No, Mum. Listen to me carefully. Stop telling those stories. You're making all of us look bad. People are going to think we come from a family of thieves. I have a reputation to protect. My children go to private schools. My husband has a respectable business." Patty's words hurt me more than the banks, more than the neighbors' stares, more than the humiliation of pawning Michael's rings. "So, what do you want me to do? Should I stay quiet while I sink into debt?" "I want you to take responsibility for your own decisions and stop blaming others for your mistakes. And if you need money, find a job. At 72, you can still work at something." She hung up without saying goodbye. I stayed sitting in my kitchen, phone in hand, finally understanding the complete dimension of my abandonment. I had not only lost money and possessions, I had lost my family. My own children had decided it was easier to blame me than to confront the reality of what Robert had done. That night, for the first time in months, I cried until I ran out of tears. I cried for Michael, who had left before seeing the betrayal of his favorite son. I cried for the mother I had been, who had given everything without keeping anything for herself. I cried for the woman I was now, alone and betrayed in a house that might soon no longer be mine. But among those tears, something small but firm began to grow in my chest. A spark of rage that had been dormant for months of self-pity and guilt. For the first time since everything started, I didn't ask myself what I had done wrong. For the first time, I asked myself what I could do to make things different. The days became a blur of basic survival and constant humiliations. My routine had been reduced to the essentials: getting up, checking if I had anything for breakfast, walking to the market with the few dollars I had left, returning and locking myself in my house until the next day. I had stopped socializing with the neighbors because their looks of pity were more painful than loneliness. One October morning, while sweeping my small porch, I saw the mail carrier approaching with a certified envelope. My stomach automatically clenched. Certified envelopes never brought good news in my new reality. Mrs. Mary Miller, here is correspondence from the courthouse. I signed for it with trembling hands. The envelope had the official seal of the Superior Court of Justice of New York. Inside, a document full of legal terms that I could barely understand, but one phrase leaped out like a scream in the middle of the silence. Precautionary real estate attachment. My house. They wanted to seize my house. I read the document 3 times, trying to understand every word. The bank had filed a civil lawsuit to recover the loan money, plus interest, plus legal fees. The total sum now amounted to $247,000, a fortune I could never gather, even if I worked the rest of my life. I had 15 days to present my defense to the court, or the seizure would proceed automatically. 15 days to explain why I shouldn't lose the only thing I had left in the world. That afternoon, I walked the 12 blocks to the courthouse, carrying the document in my shopping bag as if it were a bomb about to explode. The building was imposing, with marble columns and hallways full of lawyers in expensive suits who walked with the haste of those who bill by the hour. I lined up at the information window. The employee, a young woman with her hair pulled back in a perfect bun, attended to me with the cold efficiency of someone who sees human tragedies paraded before her every day. I need information about this document, I said, handing her the paper. She reviewed it quickly, typed something on her computer, and looked at me with an expression that mixed professionalism with a hint of compassion. Ma'am, you need to hire an attorney to represent you in this process. Without legal representation, it is very likely you will lose the case. How much does a lawyer cost? It depends on the case, but a process like this can cost between $50,000 and $100,000. $50,000! It was like asking me to buy the moon. With what I had left in my bag, I couldn't even afford the bus ride home. Are there no free attorneys? Yes, there is the public defender's office, but they have a long wait list. And honestly, ma'am, in civil debt cases like yours, it's very difficult to win. I left the courthouse feeling smaller than ever. On the sidewalk, I sat on a planter and took out my old cell phone to call Edward, my middle son. Maybe the seriousness of the situation would make him reconsider. Hello, Eddie. It's your mother. I need to talk to you urgently. What now? They're going to seize the house, son. The bank is suing over Robert's loan, and if I don't get a lawyer in 15 days, I'm going to lose my home. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. And what do you want me to do, Mum? Eddie, please. It's the house where you grew up, where your father lived his last years. I can't lose it. Look, Mum, I told you from the beginning that this whole thing with Robert was going to bring consequences. You signed it. You are responsible. I don't have money for expensive lawyers. I'm not asking you to pay for everything, just to help me. No, Mum. I'm sick of every time someone in the family screws up. We all have to pay the price. Everyone handles their own problems. And he hung up. I tried once more with Patty, although I knew the answer would be just as cruel. Mum, I already told you that you can't keep blaming Robert for your bad decisions. If you're going to lose the house, find a cheaper apartment. At your age, you don't need so much space. Patricia, that house holds all the memories of your father, of you when you were children. Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls. Besides, maybe this will help you learn to be more financially responsible. She hung up too. That night, while having my eternal combination of rice and beans for dinner, I touched all the walls of my house. The kitchen where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family, the living room where Michael and I had watched TV every night for 20 years, the room where my children had slept, where I had comforted their nightmares and celebrated their achievements. In my bedroom closet, I found a shoebox full of old photographs. There was Robert, at 5 years old, dressed as a pirate for a school party. Patty, in her first communion dress, smiling with no front teeth. Edward in his soccer uniform, dirty and happy after a game. How had they become strangers? At what moment had the love I had sown in their hearts transformed into this calculated coldness? The answer arrived 2 days later, when I least expected it. I was cleaning the refrigerator, trying to make the few groceries I had left look more abundant than they were, when I found a folded paper behind the butter dish. It was an old, yellowed letter, written in Robert's handwriting. I recognized it immediately because it was the same careful handwriting with which he had signed all the documents for my ruin. The letter was addressed to a man named John and dated 3 years ago. As I read it, my world collapsed once more, but now in a different, more definitive way. John, brother, I have everything planned. My old lady is already a little senile. She believes everything I tell her. I'm going to convince her to sign a loan in her name. I'm going to tell her it's for a Bitcoin business or some BS like that. With that cash, I'm heading to Spain. I have some really good investment opportunities in crypto over there that will make me a multimillionaire. If it goes well, in 5 years, I'll come back with a fortune in euros. If it goes badly, well, the old lady can deal with the debt. Whatever. She's already lived her life. I'm just starting mine. My siblings will be on my side because they also know it's about time someone else took care of the old lady. It's too hard to support an elderly person when you have your own plans. See you soon in Madrid, man. The letter fell from my hands as if it had been burning. Robert hadn't acted on impulse, out of desperation, or because an opportunity suddenly presented itself. He had been planning my destruction for years. He had calculated every word, every smile, every gesture of affection during Michael's funeral, all with the sole objective of earning my trust, only to betray me later. She's already lived her life. Those 4 words echoed in my head like hammer blows. For my own son, I was already a useless old woman whose only function was to facilitate the money for his dreams of wealth abroad. I sat on my kitchen floor, the crumpled letter in my hands, and for the first time in months, I didn't cry. Instead of tears, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Michael's death, a pure, clean, powerful rage. It wasn't the destructive rage of someone seeking revenge. It was the constructive rage of someone who finally understands that they have been fighting the wrong battle. I didn't have to prove my innocence to anyone. I didn't have to earn the love of children who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I didn't have to justify my right to exist with dignity. For the first time in my life, I had to fight for myself, only for myself. That night, instead of lying down to lament, I sat at my dining table with a notebook and a pen. I wrote down everything I remembered about the signatures, about Robert's promises, about the dates and the names. I wrote about the letter I had found, about the phone calls, about every detail that could be important. If I was going to lose my house, at least I would be fighting. And if Robert thought he could destroy me without consequences, he was about to discover that he had severely underestimated the woman who had raised him. The next day, with my notebook full of notes and Robert's letter stored in my purse as if it were pure gold, I headed back to the courthouse. This time, I didn't go as the defeated woman of days past. I walked with my back straight, carrying the weight of my indignation like a shield. The line for the public defender's office was long, full of people who, like me, had reached the point where free justice was their only hope. I lined up behind a young man carrying a folder tied with rubber bands and an older woman who whispered prayers while she waited her turn. After 3 hours of waiting, I finally reached the window. The attorney who attended to me was named Andrea Morrison, a woman around 40, with glasses and an expression that spoke of too many cases and too little time. "Ma'am, I see you have a case of seizure for civil debt. I must warn you that these cases are very difficult to win, especially when there are documents signed by your own hand. Attorney, I have evidence that my son deliberately tricked me. Here is the proof." I showed her Robert's letter. The attorney read it with increasing attention, and for the first time, I saw something close to genuine interest in her eyes. "This changes things, Mrs. Miller. This letter constitutes evidence of premeditation and malice. We could argue that you were a victim of family fraud and credit identity theft. Does that mean I can win? It means we have grounds to fight." She was cautious. "I won't promise you a victory, but I can assure you that we are going to make your son accountable for his actions." For the first time in months, I felt something close to hope. Attorney Morrison explained that we would file a counterclaim for fraud and emotional distress, in addition to asking the court to suspend the seizure while the circumstances of the loan were investigated. "We are going to need all the evidence you can gather. Any text message, any conversation, any witness who was present when he asked you to sign the documents." I left the courthouse with a strange feeling. It wasn't happiness. I was still very far from that. But it was something I hadn't felt in months. I had a plan. I had an ally. I had a chance to fight. During the following weeks, I became a detective in my own tragedy. I checked every corner of my house looking for evidence. I found receipts for the money Robert had borrowed from me over the years, always with promises to pay it back as soon as he got paid for the next project. I found text messages where he asked me for favors, spoke to me affectionately, and promised that soon he would give me the life I deserved. I also found something more valuable: the phone number of John, the friend to whom the letter was addressed. I had saved it in my address book when Robert asked me to give him messages a few years ago. The call to John was one of the most difficult conversations of my life, but also one of the most revealing. "Mr. John, Robert's mother." "Yes, John. I need to ask you something about my son. Do you know where he is?" There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, I didn't know you didn't know. Robert has been living in Valencia, Spain, for 2 years. He has a wine import business and a Spanish girlfriend. He lives very well, in a very expensive apartment in the city centre." Every word was like a stab. While I was selling my wedding rings to buy rice, my son was living in Europe with the money he had stolen from my future. "John, did you know he tricked me to get a loan?" Another silence, longer this time. "Ma'am, He told me he had secured money for the business, but I didn't know it came from you. I thought he had investors or something." It was a white lie, but I decided not to push him further. I had enough information for my lawyer. The most painful moment came when I decided to try and contact Robert directly. Attorney Morrison had given me the number of a private investigator who, for very little money, had managed to find my son's contact information in Spain. I dialed the international number with trembling hands. After several rings, I heard his voice. The same voice that had asked for my trust that afternoon in July, but now with a slightly Spanish accent. "Hello, Robert. It's your mother." The silence that followed lasted an eternity. "Mum, how did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter, son. I need us to talk. Mum, I'm very busy. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Robert, they are going to take my house. The bank is suing over the loan you took out. I need you to come back and fix this. His response chilled my blood. Mum, did you forget that you signed those papers? I didn't force you to do anything. Besides, I invested that money in legitimate businesses. If they went wrong, it's not my fault. Son, I have your letter. The letter where you wrote to John that you were going to deliberately trick me. Another silence, but this one had a different tone. It was the silence of someone who had just realized that his perfect lie had a fatal crack. I don't know what letter you're talking about, Mum. And honestly, I don't have time for your drama. I'm over that stage of my life. I have a new family now, new responsibilities. You've already lived your life. Let me live mine in peace. You've already lived your life. The same words from the letter. The words that summarized my own son's life philosophy. I was a disposable obstacle on his path to wealth and success. Robert, I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months, Jim Schwart. I raised you. I sent you to college. And I helped you when my dad died. We're even now. Now everyone goes their own way. He hung up. I stayed sitting with the phone in my hand, but for the first time, I didn't cry. The conversation had an unexpected effect. It had completely killed any hope I still had of recovering the son I thought I had raised. There was nothing left to rescue, no relationship to rebuild. Only justice remained. That night, I called Attorney Morrison and told her about the conversation. I also gave her all the details John had shared with me about the luxurious life Robert was leading in Spain with my money. Perfect, Mrs. Miller. This significantly strengthens our case. A son living in luxury abroad while his mother faces the seizure of her house is a very powerful image before any judge. Do you really think we can win? Ma'am, I have more confidence now. And there's something else we can do. We're going to request that your son's bank accounts be frozen, both in New York and in Spain. If we can prove that the money he has comes from the fraud he committed against you, we can recover some of the assets. For the first time in almost a year, I went to sleep feeling that maybe, just maybe, justice existed. And that maybe, just maybe, my son had severely underestimated the woman who had raised him to be a better person than he had chosen to be. The next day, I woke up with a new feeling. It wasn't happiness, but it wasn't the desperation that had accompanied me for months either. It was determination. A cold and clear determination that regardless of the outcome, I was going to fight until the end. Robert had taken my money, my peace of mind, and my trust in my family. But he had made one mistake. He had left evidence of his betrayal. And now that evidence was going to become the weapon I would use to reclaim my dignity. The months that followed were an emotional roller coaster that I never thought I would have the strength to endure. Attorney Morrison had managed to temporarily suspend the seizure while the legal process unfolded. But that only meant the sword was still hanging over my head, held barely by a bureaucratic thread that could snap at any moment. During those months, I learned things about the legal system that no mother should ever have to learn. I learned that justice is slow, costly, and not always fair. I learned that being right doesn't guarantee winning. I learned that fighting your own child in court is an experience that changes you forever, one that kills something inside you, but also makes something new and stronger grow. The day of the first hearing, I arrived at the courthouse dressed in my best clothes, a navy blue dress that had been my sister's, black shoes I had polished until they shone like mirrors, and the fake pearl necklace Michael had given me on our 10th anniversary. I wanted the judge to see a dignified woman, not a victim. Attorney Morrison had prepared me for what to expect, but nothing prepared me to see Robert enter the courtroom accompanied by a lawyer who clearly cost more money than I had seen in my entire life. My son wore a suit that looked straight out of a magazine. He had a gold watch on his wrist and walked with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the winning cards. When our eyes met for the first time in more than 2 years, I waited to see something. Remorse, shame, pain, any emotion that indicated there was anything left of the child I had raised. But his eyes looked at me with the coldness of a stranger, as if I were simply another annoying legal obstacle he had to overcome to continue with his life. His lawyer, a tall, thin man with a smile that seemed practiced in front of a mirror, began his argument by painting Robert as a responsible son who had tried to help his mother with her financial problems. "Your Honor, my client acted in good faith when he agreed to be the beneficiary of a loan that his mother voluntarily applied for. The documents clearly show that Mrs. Mary Miller signed all the required papers, without any coercion. If she subsequently could not meet the payments, that is a responsibility she assumed when she signed." Hearing that distorted version of events made my blood boil, but Attorney Morrison had taught me to remain composed. My moment would come. When my lawyer presented the letter Robert had written to John, the expression of confidence on my son's face changed for the first time. I saw how his eyes nervously darted towards his lawyer, how his hands began to fidget on the table. "Your Honor," Attorney Morrison said, "this letter, written in the defendant's own hand, clearly demonstrates that there was premeditation and malice in the deception toward my client. The exact words are, 'I'm going to convince her to sign a loan in her name. I'm going to tell her it's for a Bitcoin business. If it goes badly, well, the old lady can deal with the debt.'" The silence in the room was deafening. Even the judge, an older man who seemed to have seen every kind of human tragedy, raised his eyebrows in surprise. Robert's lawyer tried to argue that the letter could be fake, that there was no way to verify its authenticity, that it had been obtained illegally, but Attorney Morrison was prepared. She had commissioned a handwriting analysis that confirmed the handwriting was Robert's, and she had testimonies from several neighbors who had seen my son taking objects from my house after I signed the documents. When it was my turn to testify, I went to the stand with trembling legs, but a steady voice. I had practiced my statement in front of the mirror for weeks, but being there, in front of the judge, with Robert, looking at me with that coldness, was different from anything I had imagined. "Your Honor, I trusted my son because he was my son, because he had been with me when his father died, because he promised me he would take care of me. I never imagined that someone who came from my own womb could plan my destruction with such coldness." My voice cracked slightly as I continued. "He knew I didn't understand loans or banks. He knew I would sign anything he asked me to because I trusted him blindly. And he used that trust as a weapon to steal not only my money, but my peace of mind, my home, and my dignity." When I finished speaking, there was a moment of silence in the room. Even Robert's lawyer seemed uncomfortable. But my son showed no emotion. He remained seated, looking at his hands, as if my testimony was merely an annoying formality he had to endure. The most devastating moment came when the judge asked Robert directly if he had anything to say in his defense. My son stood up, adjusted his tie, and with a clear voice and not the slightest sign of remorse, said, "Your Honor, I invested that money in legitimate businesses. If the investments didn't work out as I expected, that is not my fault. My mother signed those documents as a responsible adult, knowing the implications. I cannot be held responsible for her imprudent financial decisions." He didn't mention even once that I was his mother. He didn't show a hint of guilt or regret. He spoke of me as if I were a stranger who had made a judgment error and now wanted to blame him for the consequences. That night, back in my house, I sat in my living room, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel sad. I felt empty, but it was a different kind of emptiness. It was the emptiness that remains when you finally accept that someone you loved never truly existed, that the person you had idealized was just a construct of your own need for maternal love. The legal process dragged on for 6 more months. There were hearings, presentation of additional evidence, and expert testimonies. Throughout that time, my other 2 children kept their distance. Patty even called me once to ask me to drop the lawsuit because it was making the whole family look bad. "Don't you realize this is going to be in the newspapers?" she said. "Aren't you thinking about your grandchildren? How are they going to feel when they find out their grandmother sued their uncle? And aren't you thinking about how I feel knowing that my own children prefer to protect a thief rather than support their mother?" I replied. She hung up and didn't call again. Edward was more direct in his cruelty. "Mom, stop the BS. Robert went to Spain. He's living his life. Why do you want to screw him over? After all, you're already old. You don't need so much money. Leave him alone. You're already old. You don't need so much money." As if my age was a justification for theft. As if reaching 72 years old automatically meant giving up my right to justice and dignity. But there was something my children didn't understand. I was no longer just fighting for the money. I was fighting for something much more important. I was fighting for my right to exist as something more than a silent victim. I was fighting against the idea that older mothers should endure any abuse simply because they had raised their abusers. The verdict arrived on a Tuesday in March, almost 2 years after everything began. The judge had deliberated for 3 weeks, and when Attorney Morrison called me with the news, her voice had an excitement I hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Miller, we won. We won everything." The judge had ruled completely in my favor. He had declared the loan null and void because it was obtained through fraud and deception. He had ordered the immediate freezing of all of Robert's accounts, both in New York and in Spain. He had condemned my son to pay compensation for emotional distress, equivalent to $300,000. And most importantly, he had ordered Robert to return to New York to face criminal charges for family fraud and identity theft. But the judicial victory was only the beginning. The real triumph was what I had discovered about myself during those 2 years of struggle, that I was stronger than I had believed, that I deserved respect and dignity, and that I didn't have to apologize for demanding justice. That night, for the first time in almost 3 years, I slept completely peacefully. The notification that Robert had been arrested at the Madrid airport arrived 6 weeks after the verdict. Attorney Morrison called me on a Friday morning with a mix of professional satisfaction and something that sounded almost like incredulity. "Mrs. Miller, your son was arrested while trying to board a flight to Dubai. Apparently, he had planned to move there to evade the legal consequences, but the international extradition order reached the airport before him." During the following weeks, events unfolded with breathtaking speed. Robert's accounts in Spain were effectively frozen, revealing a fortune that exceeded €2 million. My son had used my money as initial capital for Bitcoin investments that, by sheer luck, had multiplied exponentially during his stay in Europe. The money he had stolen from my future had become the basis of an estate that included a luxury apartment in Valencia, a wine import business, and a Bitcoin portfolio worth more than everything I had owned in my entire life. But the bitterest irony was discovering that while I was selling Michael's wedding rings to buy rice, Robert had been monthly sending money to an account in the Cayman Islands to evade taxes. The accountant that my son had used all his financial knowledge not to build an honest life, but to perfect his theft. When he finally returned to New York, handcuffed and flanked by 2 FBI agents, I was waiting for him at the airport. I hadn't gone to gloat or enjoy his humiliation. I had gone because I needed to see him with my own eyes. I needed to confirm that the man getting off that plane was really the child I had raised with so much love. I watched him walk through the airport corridor, no longer with the arrogant confidence he had shown in the courtroom, but with the slumped posture of someone who finally understood that the consequences had come to collect their debt. When our eyes met through the glass of the waiting area, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. It wasn't fear of jail or legal consequences. It was the fear of a child who finally understands that he has forever lost his mother's love. It was the fear of someone who realizes that some betrayals have no possible forgiveness. That night, in the quiet of my house that was no longer in danger of being seized, I reflected on the strange turn my life had taken. In less than 3 years, I had gone from being a quiet widow with a modest pension to technically being a woman with access to a multi-million-dollar fortune. Because that was what the court verdict meant. All the assets Robert had acquired with the stolen money legally belonged to me. The apartment in Valencia, the wine business, the cryptocurrency. Everything had to be liquidated to compensate for the damage he had caused me. But the wealth, I discovered, didn't feel the way I had imagined it would. The first decision I made was to refuse to live in the Valencia apartment that now belonged to me. When Attorney Morrison suggested that I could move there and live like a European millionaire, my response was immediate and firm. I would never set foot in a place built with my pain. Instead, I ordered that the apartment be sold and the money transferred to an account in New York. I did the same with the wine business and with most of the bitcoins. All that fortune that had been born of my betrayal returned to its place of origin, converted into US dollars and deposited in the same bank that had once threatened to take my house. The sweetest revenge was not seeing Robert in jail. It was the call I received from the same Mr. Johnson who had come to my house 3 years ago to notify me of my debt. Now his voice had a completely different tone, a difference that bordered on the servile. "Mrs. Miller, it is an honor to inform you that the bank has decided to offer you our premium wealth management services. With your new financial situation, we believe we could help you maximize the return on your assets." I interrupted him with a smile in my voice. "Mr. Johnson, do you remember me? 3 years ago, you came to my house to threaten to take my home. You called me an irresponsible debtor." The silence on the other end of the line was delicious. Ma'am, those were the bank's policies at the time." "The bank's policies haven't changed, Mr. Johnson. What changed was my bank account. And now that I have money, suddenly I'm worthy of respect, right?" "Ma'am, we always—" "Mr. Johnson, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with my money. I'm going to take it out of your bank and put it into an institution that treats all people with dignity, regardless of how many zeros they have in their account." And I hung up. That afternoon, I opened an account at a credit union I had learned about years ago when I was desperately looking for options to save my house. The woman who helped me was the same one who had explained with patience and kindness that they couldn't help me because I didn't have enough income to qualify for a loan. "Mrs. Mary, how wonderful to see you. How are you? How can we help you today?" "I've come to open a savings account and to make a donation to your loan program for vulnerable women." When I told her the amount I wanted to deposit, her eyes widened. "Ma'am, are you sure about this amount?" "Completely sure. And I want this money to be used specifically to help older women who have been victims of family fraud. I want them to have access to free lawyers and psychological support." During the months that followed, my new financial reality opened doors I never knew existed, but it also made me understand the true nature of many human relationships. Suddenly I had distant relatives who remembered my existence and neighbors who had always been very loving toward me. Patty called me for the first time in 2 years, with a sweet voice she hadn't used with me since she was a teenager. "Mum, it's great that everything finally worked out favorably. I always had faith that justice would triumph. Patty, 2 years ago you told me to stop slandering your brother and to take responsibility for my mistakes." "Oh, Mum, you know I've always supported you. The thing is, I was worried about you. I didn't want you to suffer more with the legal process." It was fascinating to see how money could rewrite history, how the very people who had abandoned me in my darkest hour now constructed narratives where they had always been on my side. Edward was even more direct in his new attitude. "Mum, I've been thinking that you should come live with us. We have an extra room, and it would be good for you to be close to the family." "Edward, when I needed help not to lose my house, you told me everyone carries their own burden." "Oh, Mum, that was when I was stressed about work. You've always been welcome in my house." But the most painful call was the one I received from the jail. Robert was entitled to one phone call a week, and he had decided to use it to talk to me. "Mum," his voice sounded broken, vulnerable, like when he was a child and had done something wrong. "I need us to talk." "Now you want to talk, Robert?" "Mum, I know what I did was wrong, but you can't let me rot in jail. I'm your son." It was the first time in years he had identified himself as my son, but his words no longer had the power to manipulate me. "Robert, you yourself told me that I had already lived my life, and to let you live yours in peace. I took you at your word. Mum, please, if you help me get out of here, I promise I'll pay you back every last penny. We can start over. Like when you promised me the loan was just a formality. Like when you promised you would take care of me after your father died. Which of your promises should I believe now?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched until the call was cut off. That night, for the first time since everything began, I didn't feel pain over the destruction of my family. I felt something that took me time to identify. Relief. The relief of finally having stopped carrying the burden of loving people who didn't love me back. The following months were the strangest of my life. For the first time in my 72 years, I had more money than I could spend. But also, for the first time, I truly understood what loneliness meant. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of realizing that the people you had loved your whole life were actually strangers who had been playing a role. One May morning, while drinking coffee in my kitchen, I could now afford the imported coffee I had always seen at the supermarket but never bought. I received an unexpected visit. It was Sophia, my 20-year-old granddaughter, Patty's daughter. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 years. The last time she was a moody teenager who barely spoke to me during family gatherings. Now she was a young woman, a psychology student at the State University, with intelligent eyes and a smile that painfully reminded me of Michael. "Grandma Mary, can I come in?" "Of course, sweetie. Do you want coffee?" We sat in my living room, and for the first time in years, I had a real conversation with someone in my family. Sophia told me about her studies, her boyfriend, and her plans to specialize in family therapy. But there was something in the way she looked at me that told me she hadn't just come for a visit. "Grandma, I want you to know that I never agreed with the way my mum and Uncle Edward treated you when everything happened with Uncle Robert." Her words surprised me. All this time, I had assumed my grandchildren thought the same as their parents. I was younger then, but I wasn't blind. I saw how you suffered. I saw how my mum refused to help you. It made me so angry, but I didn't know what to do. "Sophia, you were very young. You didn't have to get involved in adult problems." "But I'm not so young anymore, Grandma. And I want you to know that I admire what you did. I admire that you fought for yourself when no one else did." For the first time in months, I felt something close to genuine happiness. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge achieved or the relief of justice done. It was the warmth of knowing that someone truly saw me, understood me, respected me. Do you know what impresses me the most, Grandma? That after everything you went through, you didn't become bitter. You're here, in your house, peaceful, not trying to hurt anyone. You think so, sweetie? I know it. Because if you were a vengeful person, you could do a lot of damage with all the money you have now. You could ruin my mum, Uncle Edward, everyone who turned their backs on you. But you haven't. She was right. Throughout these months, I hadn't used my new financial position to hurt my other children. I hadn't cut off the educational loans Patty had taken out for her children. I hadn't interfered with Edward's business. I had simply moved away from them, like someone walking away from a burning house to avoid getting burned. Grandma, can I ask you something personal? Of course, sweetie. Do you miss the family you had before? I mean, I know it wasn't real, but do you miss the feeling of having a family? The question went straight to my heart. It was the question I had asked myself thousands of times during sleepless nights. Sophia, I miss the family I thought I had. I miss the illusion that my children loved me. But I don't miss the reality of what it really was. Me giving everything and receiving crumbs of affection when it was convenient for them. And don't you feel lonely? I felt lonelier when I was surrounded by people who used me than I do now that I'm truly alone. At least now the loneliness is honest. Sophia was quiet for a moment, processing my words. Grandma, would you mind if I visited you once in a while? Not for the money, I swear, but because I think you're the bravest person I know, and I would like to get to know you better. That afternoon, after Sophia left, I sat in my garden, which I could now keep perfectly manicured, thanks to a gardener who came twice a week. And I thought about how strange destiny was. I had lost 3 children, but I had found a granddaughter. I had lost a fake family, but I had gained an authentic relationship. The following days were full of changes I never anticipated. I decided to use some of my money to do something I had always wanted but never could afford. To travel. Not extravagant trips to Europe or Asia, but simple trips within America, to places I had dreamed of seeing since I was a child. My first destination was Charleston, South Carolina. I had seen so many photos of its markets, its churches, its textiles, that I felt as if I had already been there in my dreams. I stayed in a small hotel in the historic district. I walked the cobblestone streets, tried food I didn't know, and talked with artisans who showed me weaving techniques that had been passed down for generations. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to ask anyone for permission to spend money on myself. I didn't have to justify why I wanted to visit a museum or buy a nice piece of craftsmanship. The money that had been born of my pain had become the key to my freedom. During those trips, I met other women my age who, like me, had reached that stage of life where they could finally do what they wanted without asking permission. Some were widows who had control of their finances for the first time. Others were divorced women who had decided it was better to be alone than in bad company. We all shared something. We had learned to value ourselves. In Napa Valley, I met Eleanor, a 68-year-old woman who had decided to leave her husband after 40 years of marriage when she discovered he had another family in San Francisco. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, I met Grace, 75, who had used her inheritance to open a small organic products business after her children tried to institutionalize her against her will. Each of these women had her own story of family betrayal, of ungrateful children, of husbands who had seen them as servants instead of partners. But all of them also had something in common. They had decided that their final years were going to be for them, not for pleasing people who didn't value them. One night, At a restaurant in New Orleans, while having dinner with a group of tourists I had met at the hotel, a Canadian woman my age asked me about my family. "Do you have children, Mary?" The question caught me by surprise. For so many years, talking about my children had been a source of pride. Robert, the successful accountant; Patty, the respected teacher; Edward, the hard-working mechanic. Now the question generated a completely different feeling. "I had 3 children," I finally replied, "but I don't think they really had a mother." "What do you mean?" "I think for them, I was more like a bank that lent them money and affection without interest. When the bank ran out of funds, they closed their accounts and went looking for other financial institutions." The woman laughed, but it wasn't a cruel laugh. It was the laugh of recognition from someone who had lived something similar. "My ex-husband once told me that I had been a very good mother, but that my children no longer needed me, and that he had the right to be happy with someone younger. As if raising children were a temporary job you could resign from when the contract ended." That conversation made me think about something I had been avoiding confronting. What did I want to do with the rest of my life? I had financial resources that gave me freedom. I had reasonably good health. I had a granddaughter who visited me and respected me. But what did I want to do with all of that? The answer arrived unexpectedly a week later when I returned to New York City. A letter was waiting for me, sent from the credit union where I had deposited part of my money. The director was inviting me to a meeting to talk about the support program for women victims of family fraud that I had funded. During the meeting, I discovered that my donation had helped 23 women in the last 6 months. Women who, like me, had been betrayed by sons, husbands, or relatives who had abused their trust to steal their savings, their houses, and their peace of mind. "Mrs. Mary," the director told me, "would you like to meet some of the women who have benefited from your program?" That afternoon, I met Rose, 69, whose son had forged her signature to sell her house and move to Europe. I met Linda, 74, who had discovered that her daughter-in-law had been stealing money from her retirement account for 5 years. I met Hope, 66, whose husband had used her good credit to run up debt on her credit cards and then abandoned her with the bills. Each of these women told me her story, and in each story, I saw mine reflected. But I also saw something else. I saw the difference that having access to timely legal and psychological help had made. Several of them had managed to recover part of their assets. All of them had recovered their dignity. It was at that moment that I knew what I wanted to do with my new life. 6 months after that meeting at the credit union, my life had taken a path I never would have imagined. I had converted a part of my house into an office and created the Hope Miller Foundation, dedicated exclusively to helping older women victims of family fraud. The name was no coincidence. Hope had been my mother's middle name, and it also represented what I wanted to give to other women who found themselves in the situation I had been in. Every morning, I woke up with a clear purpose. I was no longer just Mary, the woman who had been betrayed by her son. Now I was Mary Miller, the woman who had transformed her pain into a tool to help others. The difference was enormous. Sophia had decided to do her community service with me at the foundation. Twice a week, she came to help me with the cases, and little by little, she had become not only my assistant, but the daughter I never truly had. She was intelligent, compassionate, and had that fresh perspective that only younger generations can provide. "Grandma, we have 3 new cases this week," she told me one October morning while we were reviewing the files. A woman from Queens whose son sold her house without her knowledge. One from Brooklyn who discovered that her grandson had been using her credit cards. And one from Staten Island whose daughter-in-law convinced her to sign documents to protect her inheritance, but which actually transferred everything to her name. Each case was a stab to the heart, but also an opportunity to make a real difference in someone's life. We had managed to recover assets worth more than $8 million for our beneficiaries, and more importantly, we had helped dozens of women regain their self-esteem and sense of dignity. The case that marked me the most was that of Mrs. Connie, a 78-year-old woman who arrived at the foundation in a near catatonic state. Her only son had completely emptied her retirement account to finance a restaurant business that went bankrupt after 6 months. When she tried to confront him, he had threatened to put her in a nursing home if she kept causing problems. Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Connie told me during our first interview, with a voice so broken it was barely audible, "I don't know if it's worth living anymore. My own son told me I was a burden, that I had already served my purpose in life." Those words immediately transported me to my own nightmares. It was exactly what Robert had said. "You've already lived your life. Let me live mine." "Mrs. Connie," I replied, taking her wrinkled hands in mine, "I'm going to tell you something that took me 72 years to learn. Our purpose in life is not defined by our children. We define it ourselves. Every day we decide to get up and keep going." We worked on her case for 4 months. We managed to recover 80% of her money, and more importantly, we got her son criminally prosecuted for financial abuse of an elder person. But the real victory was seeing how Mrs. Connie regained her inner strength, how her eyes shone again, and how her voice regained firmness. The last time I saw her, she had started taking painting classes at the community center in her neighborhood and was considering adopting a cat for company. "Mrs. Miller, you saved my life," Mrs. Connie told me that day. "No, Mrs. Connie, you saved yourself. I only lent you the tools." But not all cases ended successfully. Some came too late, when there were no assets left to recover, or when the women were too emotionally broken to keep fighting. Those cases hurt me especially because they reminded me how close I had been to giving up myself. One November afternoon, while reviewing one of these difficult cases, I received an unexpected call. It was Patty. "Mum, I need to talk to you urgently." Her voice had a tone I hadn't heard before. Panic mixed with humiliation. "What's wrong, Patty?" "It's about Sophia. I found out she's working with you at your foundation thing." "That's right. Sophia is doing her community service with me. She's a very intelligent and committed young woman." "Mum, you can't involve my daughter in your revenge against the family. Sophia is very impressionable. She doesn't understand the complexities of what happened with Robert." The word revenge stung me like a slap. "Patty, helping women who have been victims of fraud is not revenge. It's social justice." "Mum, please. You already won. You already have your money. You already proved you were right. Isn't that enough? Why do you have to keep stirring up the past?" "Because there are dozens of women who are living what I lived, and if my experience can help them, then something good will have come out of all this pain." "But Sophia doesn't have to be involved in this. She's my daughter, not yours." That phrase hurt me more than Patty could have imagined. She was right. Sophia was not my daughter. But in these months, I had developed the relationship with my granddaughter that I had always dreamed of having with my own children. A relationship based on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and disinterested affection. "Patty, Sophia is an adult. She can decide for herself who she wants to spend her time with." "Mum, if you don't stop involving my daughter in your affairs, I'm going to have to forbid her from visiting you." "Are you going to threaten your own daughter so she won't see her grandmother? Doesn't it seem to you that this is exactly the kind of family manipulation we are fighting against at the foundation?" Patty hung up without answering. That night, when Sophia arrived to help me with some files, I told her about her mother's call. "Oh, Grandma, my mum already called me. She's super angry." "And what do you think, sweetie?" Sophia sat on the sofa in my living room, in the same spot where years ago I had cried over Robert's betrayal, and looked at me with a maturity that surprised me. "Grandma, I told my mum that what you're doing is the most important thing I've seen in my life. In college, we study all sorts of theories about social justice and human rights. But here with you, I'm seeing how it's actually applied, how lives are truly changed. Aren't you afraid your mum will be angry with you?" "Of course I'm afraid, but I'm more afraid of becoming the type of person who prefers to stay silent rather than do the right thing. My mum, Uncle Edward, Uncle Robert, all of them chose comfort over justice when you needed them most. I don't want to be like that." Her words filled me with a pride I had never felt as a mother, but that I now experienced as a grandmother. Sophia represented the possibility that the new generations could break the cycles of family abuse and neglect that seemed to repeat themselves over and over. 2 weeks later, Patty carried out her threat. She came to my house accompanied by Edward and her husband in what was clearly a planned family intervention. "Mum, we came to talk to you about the situation with Sophia," Patty began, using the condescending tone she had perfected over years of being an elementary school teacher. "There is no situation with Sophia. She comes here willingly to help with the Foundation's work." "Mum, it's clear that you have manipulated my daughter to take your side against the family," Edward intervened. "Sophia didn't have problems with us before, and now she's going around saying we're abusers." "And aren't you?" I asked with a calmness that surprised even myself. "When I needed help, you told me to be responsible for my mistakes. When I found out Robert had swindled me, you told me to stop slandering him. When I was about to lose my house, you told me everyone carries their own burden. What would you call that behavior?" "Mum, we're over all that," Patty said. "You already won the lawsuit. You already got your money back. Why can't we start over as a family?" "Because starting over requires acknowledging what was wrong the first time, and you still believe you didn't do anything wrong." Patty's husband, who had remained silent until that moment, decided to intervene. "Mrs. Miller, with all due respect, I think you are being too hard on your children. They made mistakes, yes, but at the end of the day, they are still your family." "And what exactly do you want from me?" I asked directly. The three of them exchanged uncomfortable glances before Edward responded. "We want you to stop filling Sophia's head with anti-family ideas. And well, we also think it would be fair for you to help us financially. After all, we are also your children, and it's not fair that Robert got all the family money." There was the truth. They hadn't come out of love, for reconciliation, or for genuine concern for Sophia. They had come for money. Once again, everything came down to money. "I understand. You want me to give you money and stop teaching my granddaughter that older women deserve respect and dignity." "Mom, don't put it that way." "How else should I put it, Patty? You abandoned me when I was poor, and now you come back because I'm rich. Do you really expect me not to see the pattern?" That meeting ended the way it had to end, with my children leaving angry, and me remaining more convinced than ever that I had made the right decisions. But the most important thing was that Sophia, who had heard the whole conversation from the kitchen, came out when they left and hugged me with a fierceness that reminded me of Michael. "Grandma, I am so proud of you, and I want you to know that no matter what my mum says, I'm going to keep working with you. This is too important to abandon because of family pressure." In that moment, I understood that I had achieved something I had never consciously sought. I had raised a granddaughter who had the moral strength that my own children never developed. And maybe that was the true victory of this entire story. The first anniversary of the Hope Miller Foundation came faster than I had expected. In 12 months, we had helped 57 women recover a total of $18 million in assets stolen by family members. But more important than the numbers was the transformation I had seen in each of these women, and the one I had experienced in myself. To celebrate the anniversary, we decided to organize an event in my house's garden. It wasn't an ostentatious celebration, but an intimate gathering where the women we had helped could share their stories of recovery and strength. Sophia had insisted that we invite journalists and social workers, arguing that it was important to shine a light on this type of abuse that was often silenced by family shame. On the afternoon of the event, while Sophia and I were arranging the chairs in my garden, an unexpected surprise arrived. It was Mrs. Remedy, my lifelong neighbour, the same one who years ago had muttered about my misfortune when she thought I couldn't hear her. "Mary, sweetie, can I talk to you for a moment?" Her tone was completely different from the one she had used with me during the worst moments of my crisis. Now there was respect in her voice, even something that sounded like admiration. "Of course, Remedy. What do you need?" "Well, I'm really embarrassed to tell you this, but I think I need your help." She told me that her son, the one who had always been so responsible and affectionate, had been taking money from her savings account for the past 2 years to finance a used car sales business that existed only in his imagination. When she confronted him, he told her it was borrowed money and that he would pay her back when the business took off. Now she had discovered that he had also used her house as collateral for a bank loan without telling her. "Mary, I know I acted very badly toward you when everything happened with Robert. I was one of the people going around talking badly about you, saying that you were surely to blame for what had happened. But now I understand that this can happen to anyone. Remedy, you don't have to apologize to me. Pain makes us do things that aren't right. The important thing is that you know now that you're not alone." That day, watching Mrs. Remedy sitting among the other women in the support group, listening to their stories and sharing hers with tears but without shame, I understood something profound about the nature of forgiveness. It wasn't about forgetting the wounds or pretending they hadn't existed. It was about understanding that shared pain can become collective strength. During the event, a young journalist from a local newspaper approached me for an interview. Her questions were direct and made me reflect on the path I had travelled. "Mrs. Miller, did you ever imagine that your personal tragedy would become a life mission?" "Never. During the worst moments, all I wanted was to survive one more day. I never thought my pain could serve any constructive purpose." What would you say to other women who are experiencing similar situations? Don't stay silent out of shame. Family financial abuse is a crime, not a private domestic problem. And it is never, ever too late to defend yourself. Have you had contact with your son Robert since he got out of jail? The question took me by surprise. Robert had been released 6 months earlier after serving his minimum sentence for good behavior. I knew he was living in New York City, working as an accountant at a small company, but we hadn't had any direct contact. No, and I'm not looking for it either. Some wounds don't heal with time. You just learn to hurt less. Don't you believe in family forgiveness? I believe in forgiveness as personal liberation. I have forgiven Robert in the sense that I no longer carry anger toward him. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean I should allow someone who hurt me once to have the opportunity to do it again. That night, after all the guests left and Sophia helped me clean up, we sat in my living room to have tea and reflect on the day. "Grandma, don't you ever miss having a normal family, like those families that gather at Christmas and truly love each other?" It was a question I had asked myself thousands of times during sleepless nights. "Sophia, I miss the idea of having a family like that, but I don't think I ever truly had one. What I had was a very convincing illusion of family, sustained by my need to believe that my sacrifices had been worth it." "And don't you feel lonely?" "I feel peaceful, which is very different. For years, I felt lonely while surrounded by people who were supposed to love me. Now I am truly alone in family terms, but I have purpose, I have peace, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that my life has value beyond what I can give to others. A week after the event, I received an unexpected letter. The sender was Robert. The return address showed that he was living in a working-class neighborhood in Queens, very far from the European luxury he had enjoyed with my money. I held the letter in my hands for several minutes before deciding to open it. Part of me was curious, but another part feared it was another attempt at manipulation. The letter was surprisingly brief. "Mum, I saw the newspaper articles about your foundation. I'm not writing to apologize because I know I don't deserve it. I'm also not writing to ask you for money, because I understand that I am no longer your son in any real sense of the word. I'm only writing to tell you that I see the photos in the papers, where you appear smiling with all those women you've helped, and I realize that you are stronger than I thought. I was wrong when I thought you had already lived your life. It turns out you were just starting it." I read the letter 3 times. There were no pleas or attempts at justification. There were no dramatic declarations of love or regret, just the recognition, perhaps belated, that he had destroyed something valuable, for something that turned out to be temporarily glamorous, but fundamentally empty. That night, I didn't save the letter in a box or tape it to the refrigerator as I used to do with my children's letters. I put it in my desk drawer, along with other important but not sentimental documents. It was evidence that Robert still existed, but he was no longer part of my emotional life. The next day, while working on a particularly difficult case, an 80-year-old woman whose daughter had sold her house without her consent to pay off gambling debts, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Mary Miller?" "Yes, speaking." "My name is Mr. George Santillana from the National Institute on Aging. We have been following the work of your foundation, and we would like to invite you to participate in a national program for the prevention of financial abuse against older adults." The proposal was exciting. The federal government wanted to use the model of our foundation as the basis for a national program. This would mean resources to help hundreds more women, training for social workers across the country, and the possibility of changing laws to better protect older adults. Mrs. Miller, your personal story, combined with the success of your foundation, makes you the ideal person to lead this project. When I hung up the phone, I sat in my office for long minutes, processing what had just happened. My personal betrayal had become a platform to create real social change. The deepest pain of my life had transformed into the most powerful tool to help others. That afternoon, when Sophia arrived for work, I told her about the government's call. "Grandma, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means? Your story is going to protect thousands of women across the country. Sophia, do you think it's worth it? Everything I went through, all the betrayal, all the pain, if in the end it helps other people, do you think it's worth it?" My granddaughter looked at me with those young but wise eyes that reminded me so much of Michael. "Grandma, I think you didn't go through all that so it would be worth it. You went through all that because sometimes life is unfair. But what you did do was decide what to do with that injustice. And that decision, that is worth everything." Her words stayed with me that night, as I prepared for sleep in the same bed where I had cried so many nights after Robert's betrayal. Now, instead of crying, I stayed awake making plans for the national program, thinking about all the women we could help, and imagining a future where no older woman had to face the abuse of her own family members alone. For the first time in my life, I felt truly powerful. Not the power that comes from money or revenge, but the power that comes from knowing that your existence makes a real difference in the world. 2 years after that conversation with Sophia, my life had changed in ways I never would have imagined possible. The national program had been a resounding success. We had established support centers in 25 states across the country and had helped more than 2,000 women recover their assets and their dignity. But more important than the numbers was the cultural transformation we were achieving. American families were starting to talk openly about financial abuse against older adults, a topic that was previously kept hidden by shame. One March morning, while reviewing reports from the different centers in my office, which now occupied the entire first floor of my house, I received a call that deeply surprised me. It was Eleanor, the coordinator of the Miami Center. "Mrs. Miller, I have a very particular case that I need to consult you about. A woman named Patty Miller wants to register for our program." The last name immediately caught my attention. "Patty Miller? By any chance, do you know if she's a teacher?" "Yes, indeed. She is an elementary school teacher. She says that her oldest son and her daughter-in-law have been stealing money from her retirement account, and she wants to sue them." "Mrs. Miller, do you know her?" "Patty. My daughter, Patty, had decided to seek help at one of the centers I had founded, without knowing that her own mother was the creator of the program. The irony was so perfect, it almost seemed like the work of destiny." "Eleanor, yes, I know her. She's my daughter." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Your daughter? Mrs. Miller, what should I do? Should I reject her application?" "No, Eleanor. Treat her exactly like any other beneficiary. If she is truly a victim of family financial abuse, she deserves the same help as any other woman." "Are you sure? Wouldn't that be a conflict of interest?" "My work in this foundation has never been personal, Eleanor. It's about justice, and justice should not depend on family ties." After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Patty, the same one who had abandoned me when I needed her most, who had told me to stop slandering Robert, and who had tried to manipulate Sophia to keep her away from me, now needed exactly the kind of help I had created. That afternoon, I told Sophia about the call. My granddaughter had grown a lot in these years, not only in age, but in wisdom. She was now 24 years old, had finished her degree in psychology, and worked full-time at the foundation as the National Case Coordinator. "Grandma, how do you feel about this?" "Honestly, Sophia, I don't know. Part of me feels a strange satisfaction that Patty is experiencing what I went through. But another part of me, the part that is still a mother despite everything, feels sad for her." "Are you going to get involved in her case?" "Not directly, but I'm going to make sure she receives the best help possible. Because one thing is to feel satisfaction for poetic justice, and a very different thing is to allow someone to suffer when you have the power to help." During the following weeks, Eleanor kept me informed about the progress of Patty's case. The situation was heartbreakingly familiar. Her oldest son, Michael, named after his grandfather, had convinced Patty to make him a co-signer on her retirement account to facilitate the paperwork when she was older. For 2 years, he and his wife had been systematically withdrawing money, telling her they were family loans. They would pay back when their financial situation improved. When Patty finally checked her bank statements, she discovered they had taken more than $800,000. When she confronted them, her daughter-in-law shouted that old people were a burden on young families, and that it was time for grandparents to contribute to the grandchildren's expenses. Michael, instead of defending his mother, supported his wife, and told Patty that if she kept causing problems, he would forbid her from seeing her grandchildren. It was exactly the same pattern of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and financial abuse that I had experienced with Robert. Patty was experiencing the pain of discovering that the son she trusted most was capable of betraying her with calculated coldness. A month after the start of Patty's case, Eleanor called me again. Mrs. Miller, Patty has asked several times about the program's founder. I think she's starting to suspect who you are. What should I tell her if she asks me directly? Tell her the truth, Eleanor. If she asks, don't lie. 2 days later, my phone rang at 9 o'clock at night. It was Patty. Her voice sounded broken, completely different from the arrogant and condescending woman who had come to my house years ago. Mum, it's Patty. Hello, daughter. How are you? Mum, I know it's you. The foundation, the program, everything. I know you're behind all of it. And how do you feel about that? There was a long silence, occasionally interrupted by small sobs. I feel like the biggest idiot in the world. For years I thought you were weak, that you had been foolish for trusting Robert. And now the exact same thing is happening to me. Michael is doing exactly what Robert did to you. Patty, family financial abuse is not something that only happens to foolish or weak people. It can happen to anyone, because it's based on the trust we naturally have in the people we love. Mum, when you needed my help, I told you to take responsibility for your mistakes. I told you to stop blaming others. And now I am living exactly what you lived. And I understand that it wasn't your fault, that it was never your fault. Her words touched my heart in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't just an apology. It was the recognition that she finally understood what I had gone through. Patty, do you want us to talk in person? I don't know if I have the right to ask you that. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness after how I treated you. Forgiveness is not something that is deserved, daughter. It is something that is given when one is ready to give it. And I am ready. We met 3 days later at a coffee shop in Greenwich Village, not far from where this whole story had unfolded. Patty arrived on time, but she looked very different from the woman I remembered. She had greying hair, deep circles under her eyes, and that expression of confusion and pain that I knew very well. We sat at a table by the window, and for the first time in years, my daughter truly looked into my eyes. Mom, I didn't come to ask you for money. I didn't come to ask you to solve my problems. I only came to ask for your forgiveness. I'm listening. When you called me to tell me about Robert, my first reaction was to think you were exaggerating, that there was surely a logical explanation. But deep down, I think I didn't want to face the reality that my brother was capable of something like that. She paused to drink water, and I saw that her hands were shaking slightly. Later, when you started fighting Robert legally, I thought you were being vengeful, that a good mother forgives everything, no matter what. But now I understand that you weren't being vengeful. You were defending yourself, and you had every right in the world to defend yourself. Patty, what are you going to do about Michael? I've already started the legal process, with the help of your foundation. It's very strange, you know. Receiving help from the organization that my own mother founded to help women like the ones we created by abandoning you. Don't think of it as a cruel irony, daughter. Think of it as a second chance. A chance to do things differently this time. Mum, is there any possibility that you and I can start over? Not as if nothing happened, because I know that's impossible. But maybe we can build something new on the ruins of what we destroyed. The question I had been waiting for years had finally arrived, and the answer surprised even myself. Patty, I'm willing to try, but it has to be on completely different terms. I am no longer the woman who needed her children's approval to feel valuable, and you can no longer be the daughter who thinks she has the right to judge her mother's decisions without offering support. What do you need from me? I need you to publicly acknowledge what happened, to be a spokesperson for the foundation, to tell your story to help other families avoid making the same mistakes we made. Your testimony could prevent other daughters from abandoning their mothers the way you abandoned me. Patty nodded slowly. Yes, yes, I can do that. I want to do that. For the first time in years, I truly saw my daughter. Not the projection of my maternal expectations, not the idealized construct of what a daughter should be, but the real Patty. A 52-year-old woman who had made terrible mistakes, but who had the courage to acknowledge them and the determination to make amends. It was a start. It wasn't the perfect reconciliation of the movies, but it was real, honest, and based on mutual respect instead of family obligation. Maybe it was exactly what we both needed.